You gotta bring them.
She's going to do a weekend with you.
And then
she's not in this stuff.
Oh, I sleep better in my motorhome than I do in my bed at home. Seriously.
I talk here. Preaching to the choir, as they say. I love it.
Just saying. Just saying. We rented twice. 2 years in a row.
Where's all the kids?
They're with my in-laws.
No, I mean your kids, right? Your wife, the other kids.
They're running around.
Reservation for.
Because we texted you, and didn't get back to us. So we didn't bring the coffee.
It's okay, man.
Once you start, because you know, because it doesn't come equipped with anything. They're empty when you rent. Empty. There's no toaster. There's no pots and pans. There's no.
When you fly to Alaska, everything's.
Oh, they've got it.
Yes,
Well,
different
because
law.
it's.
That's what they do. Everybody flies.
Right.
Nobody drives it. Some drive it. We met some folks that were before they had big models that they've been doing for years. And they drive out. And then the Homer, that was really cool.
I mean, you know what?
That's all. I love it.
I hope everything's okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Nervous as heck. How are you?
Yeah. And so you can be, we've been there, not standing in front of the camera.
The camera's what makes me nervous. I don't have a problem talking to people, but that's gonna go on the internet. People will be able to watch that later.
It's actually on the internet right now. It's happening right now. Hi guys, how are you? Thanks for joining us tonight. We're waiting for a couple of our guests to kind of come in. So we're so glad that you're joining us live right now on Facebook. We're glad that you're here with us tonight. We're going to get started here in just a few minutes. We just wanted to give people a chance to come in and join us and get in the comments and be part of tonight. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you'd like to ask anything, do us a favor. In the comments section on Facebook Live right now, while you're joining us, if you have a question, if you use the hashtag comment or hashtag question, I'll be able to see it right here. And I'm going to be kind of hosting our night tonight. I'll be able to ask your questions as we go. If for some reason we miss you, we don't answer your question live here, or it's not asked by our guests who are here with us live, feel free to go back in the replay, and always feel free to leave your question or your comment, whatever you want, and we'll get to that kind of on demand. So we thank you for joining us. We're going to give everybody a couple more minutes to get situated, and then we're going to get going. So thanks so much for joining us on a Wednesday night, and we're going to get started with Town Talks in just a few minutes. Very professional.
You're very what?
Professional.
You are. Lights is super bright. I see that there's a delay. Clearly get out of town.
They can see you.
What?
It's just saying they can see you.
Oh, I know.
I will need it.
What? I mean, I think it might be a little dark, but it's also like super blinding.
Super what?
Super blinding! In my eyes! Hi.
I don't know you.
Well, good evening, guys. Thanks for joining us here in person. Thanks for joining us live on Facebook Live for tonight's session of the Tau Talks. We're talking about the sacrament of marriage, matrimony. Joining me tonight is my wife, Kate, and our pastor here at Assumption, Friar Rick. And tonight's going to be a little bit different as far as format is concerned. It's going to be less of like a teaching or a lecture. Normally when we do our Tau Talks, we have information that will pop up on the board behind us. We're not going to be doing that so much tonight. We're going to be having more of a conversation around the topic of marriage and how the sacrament of matrimony works and what the church teaches about that. We have the ability to answer questions live, so if you're watching with us now, feel free to ask those questions in the comments section using the hashtag question that will pop right up to the top so I can see those things. We're going to do our best to be as professional as possible. When we do this is our first time doing using this particular style of Tau Talk, so we appreciate you guys bearing with us as we work through this. And obviously, all of you guys are here with us live. Feel free to stop us and ask questions at any point. It's more of a conversation than it is a lecture than anything else. So thank you very much for joining us. We're glad you're here. Rick, did you want to start off with anything?
Sure. I just want to first of all say that in case we look a little distracted, we're looking at the computer screen and there's a delay on it. So we're like, I'm not doing that. What's going on here? So it's our first time doing that.
And I'm just really awkward. So.
You're not awkward. Anyways, we're really excited to have people here with us today, and then those of you who are watching on Facebook right now live, or at your leisure afterwards. Town Talks is our effort to bring faith and formation to you at home when you're ready to receive it. So it's our way of being present to you in a way that's accessible to everyone. So today we're talking about marriage, and specifically the sacrament of matrimony. So marriage is a human reality, the coupling of men and women in the sacrament, in a union that generates life, right? And so all over the world, in every tradition, there is that reality. Some people don't get married. Some people have different types of relationships. Some people choose to live a life that is specifically focused on chastity. All good things. But marriage of a man and a woman is a unique relationship in society and in the church. So one of the best examples is in the Gospel of Mark, when the Jewish leaders are trying to trip up Jesus and about his understanding of marriage. And they say, well, you know, Moses allowed for divorce. And he said, well, yes. So we know in Genesis, God created male and female. He created them as equals. You know, in Genesis, there's two accounts of creation. One where a rib is taken from Adam to create Eve. And there's a whole other account where God creates Adam and Eve at the same time. They're both true. You know, Scripture is not history. Scripture is truth-telling in a story form, especially a book like Genesis. And it tells us that both men and women were created on purpose. We are not accidental. Whether it comes through evolution or whether it happened in 6 days, nobody knows for sure, but evolution looks like the more credible way of creation. But it was on purpose. It was willed by God that men and women would be together and that they would form a relationship, that they would complement one another. And Jesus says in the Gospel of Mark, that's why a husband leaves his mother and father and joins with his wife, and they become one. So we have that primary sense of marriage having two essential components. The procreative, which means giving life, and the unitive, that relationship of love between husband and wife. Those are the two necessary poles. Now, the church wasn't always there at that time, right? I mean, the church evolved in its understanding. As it began to reflect on what marriage was and what human beings were meant to do, and even human sexuality, there were some times when people saw sexuality and marriage as a lesser kind of vocation, you know? If you couldn't be celibate, perfect people like me, and chaste, well then, you know, if you had to give in to your base urges, well then you could get married and have children. But sexuality and marriage was seen as dirty, you know? And virginity was prized as a form of spiritual and physical purity. Today, that would not be our understanding. All of God's creation is sacred. All of who we are is holy. Pope John Paul II developed this whole theology of the body. The French philosopher Gabriel Marcel says, we don't have bodies. Bodies are not like a pencil we hold in our hand. We don't have a body. We are a body. We are embodied spirits. We are spirits that have flesh. And there's one reality, and all of it is God's gift. The fact that Jesus became human tells us that humanity is sacred. And then the Feast of the Assumption and the Feast of the Ascension again echo that. Mary in her body rises to heaven. All of who she is in the flesh is holy and sacred. And our sexuality is sacred. It's mysterious, it's messy, it's complicated, but it is sacred. We approach it like the burning bush of Moses, with our shoes removed with tiptoes and just very, very, very sensitively. So today, we don't understand as marriage or religious life or as priesthood as competitive or one is better than the other. They are all paths to holiness. The Church in Vatican II called all of us to be pilgrims on the way to holiness. So marriage as a sacrament is a union of husband and wife in a natural level, marriage, which is raised to a sacrament, which means when husband and wife, when two Christian people, men and women, marry each other, they make Christ present in their union. We believe, so when a priest witnesses the marriage ceremony, the priest does not marry the couple. The couple marries each other. The priest acts, or the deacon acts as a witness on behalf of the church. This is a wonderful sacrament that lay people give to one another. The exchange of vows makes Christ truly present in their relationship. It is awesome. Awesome. God is truly present. In the readings we hear on Sunday, God has made his abode among us, among humanity. We're going to hear it on Sunday. And it happens in marriage. It's spectacular. So when you, as a couple, love each other, when you make love, when you fight and reconcile, you are really bringing about the kingdom of God in your relationship. You're teaching the rest of us about who Christ is. So I can go on for hours about this. The one thing I know it's going to come up, and I'll go into it right away because I know it's going to be an issue. Somebody already texted me and said, well, what about same-sex marriages? You know, we as a church, our whole sexuality, our understanding of sexuality is built on very traditional Aristotelian Thomistic philosophy. We have a very narrow understanding of how things work. And our understanding of sexuality is one that's evolving. We've evolved to understand that marriage is not just about children, it's also about the love between a man and a woman. We recognize as a church that there are people for whom this is not a possibility, who don't feel called to that and whose orientation doesn't lend to that. And the church says that we owe them great respect and love. At this point, we're not in a position to recognize those as marriages. But there's many bishops who have said, well, if people want to live a monogamous, loving relationship, should we not have some structure to bless or acknowledge that? That's above my pay grade, but I think that's something that the church is grappling with. And so, although we're speaking right now about a relationship of a husband and wife, and even if the church were ever to recognize other types of relationships and marriages, you can't change it. The foundation of society is the relationship of husband and wife. It's how children come into the world. So, what we say today, with a big caveat that we are not disrespecting anybody else's choices, anybody else's orientation, anybody else's choice in life. And there are people who choose to be single, and that's their calling. And we love our single parishioners. That's so important because they have so much to offer the church. All are welcome, and we really mean that.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for.
So that's the theory.
Thank you.
And so a lot of, if you guys do me a favor, scoot over a little bit more there, like two boxing me up. All right, there we go.
Oh.
So the other part of the conversation we want to have, and Rick has already kind of started having that conversation, is what is the role of the church and clergy in marriage? Because believe it or not, even though you're not part of our married relationship, the clergy and the church have a role, and you kind of highlighted that a little bit, talking about you stand as a witness for the whole church, and you help be a witness and help impart that blessing of God on our marriage. But we as husband and wife, we as spouses, we confer that sacrament on one another, which is really cool. So the first thing we kind of wanted to talk about was, as we kind of direct from what Rick said, talking about what's the church's role within that. And we'll get back to that a little more later. But also, what is the role of a man and a woman within marriage? So what is the role of a wife within a marriage relationship, and what's the role of a husband within a marriage relationship? Because sometimes I think we have this really negative connotation behind it. You know, sometimes in weddings, people are asked what scriptures that they want to use. And, you know, sometimes we hear that verse of, wives, be subordinate to your husbands out of reverence for Christ. Wives should be subordinate to their husbands as the Lord. For as the husband is the head of his wife, just as Christ is the head of his church, he himself is the Savior of the body. So we hear this passage, and we hear this ugly word being subordinate. And I wanted to first, because when we were planning our marriage, our wedding, that was a possibility of a scripture that came up. And what was your initial reaction to that?
No.
Hell no.
No,
Right, so
we
it's
did not
something,
do that one.
Right. So then, when you hear a passage like that, when we're talking about marriage, what is your first thought? Like, what was your thought, and how does that make you feel as a wife?
So when we were first getting ready to get married, I had a very negative response to that. I think I still have a tendency, not because of the passage itself, because we know that Scripture is inerrant, but because of the way that passage has been used, and the idea that it means that wives should be submissive, and the way that certain organizations and movements throughout history have used it, and I don't like that, obviously. But when you look at the actual passage, like that line comes along with another line. The line, if I'm remembering right, immediately after is, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. And of course, we know that to love the church, Christ died and laid down his life. So I think it was more, I interpret it more as a mutual giving up of self as we try to create a family and try to create a partnership that actually works. There's the old saying that, like, for marriage to work, it can't be 50% and 50%, it has to be 100% and 100%. And to me, that's what Paul was trying to say, but maybe not in language that I prefer.
Right.
Well, the other thing, St. Paul is expecting Christ to return any minute.
That's true.
Right? And so he says, if you're a slave, stay a slave. If you're a master, stay a master. If you're not married, don't bother getting married. If you are married, okay, go on. But like, it's going to be any day now, there's going to be the second coming. So, like, let's not worry about this stuff. It doesn't really matter. Just keep on going, because it's about to come. The kingdom is coming any minute now. And then obviously time went on. So Paul was a man of his time and of his understanding about slavery, like I said. And as you said, his whole concept is, well, just as Christ is with the church. Well, Christ's model of leadership in the church is washing his disciples' feet. He tells us that's what leadership is, to serve, to humble yourself. So husbands, serve and humble yourselves in front of your wives.
And like you said, Kate, when you look at the last part of that, it's just as hard for me as a husband to swallow the pill of, my model of being a husband is I have to be willing to die, not just for you or for my family, but also the willingness to die to myself and start putting away some of the things that I would have done in my single life. You know, not just like the embarrassing things that may get us in trouble, but the desires of things that maybe, you know, like, nothing wrong with having like friendships and doing things like going out and hanging out with friends or with the boys or whatever, but also me focusing in on things like, you know, every once in a while I gotta give up the things that maybe, I don't want to say make me happy, but like these things that, like, if I need to make room for my family, I have to be willing to do that kind of stuff. And when it says that I should be willing to lay down my life for my family, it's about being sacrificial. It's essentially, when Paul is teaching on that love and the relationship in marriage between man and woman, it's talking about a sacrificial love, a love based on service rather than on self-gratitude and self-fulfillment. So that's really, and then when I wanted to share about, like, kind of where I feel my role as a husband, a lot of times when we see that passage too, it makes us think that, like, I'm in charge. You know what I mean? So, like, when I'm talking about her being subordinate to me, that means that all the things that I say, you're just going to be on board with. And I don't think that's the case. My understanding, as I've looked at that scripture more, is really looking at, okay, when we have really big decisions to make, when our family is at a crossroads, when our marriage is at a crossroads, and there's decisions that have to be made, there's going to be times where we very seriously need to sit down and have a lot of dialogue and really think and pray and discern where God is in this. But then there's also times where I'm going to come to you and say, like, this is a thing that's happening, and I definitively think that we should head in this direction. And I know that you're going to give me my support in that, because very rarely I, as a husband, am doing the thing, I'm putting my foot down. And I'm not putting my foot down about, like, there's no ice cream after 8 o'clock. But I am putting, sometimes I tend to be, okay, this is the way I think we need to go, and I really need you to back me on this. Likewise, you have the exact same level of honor in our relationship and in our home, and there have been times where Kate has come to me and you've shared, like, this is the direction that we're going to go in, and I know, based on the way that you're presenting it to me, that I'm like, okay, this is the direction our family's going in, and that is me learning to be, part of this is learning to be subordinate, what subordination means as a reciprocal relationship. Like, I need to be willing to be underneath her and follow her and trust that she has my best interest and our children's best interest in mind. So that was kind of part of it, is destigmatizing this idea that there's somebody who's in charge of the family, that we lead this family together in a relationship, and there are times where she's trusting me to take the lead, and there's times where I'm trusting you to take the lead. You know, and one of the things that you shared with me really early on, Kate, if you guys didn't know this about my wife, in college, when she went to college, you were on a crew team. And so she shared a lot about the relationship that a crew team has with one another. And what is it that okay, I don't know all the terminology. So the person at the front of the boat, or who's barking out the orders.
The only person who's facing forward is
Right.
the coxswain.
Right. And so what was typically your relationship with
I do what the coxswain tells me to do.
Right. But like
I rowed bow, so I was at the very front of the boat, but it seemed like the back because I was going backwards.
Right.
And so you have to have great faith in the coxswain, because one time we had this novice coxswain who'd never done it before, and she put us right over a chunk of ice in the Black Rock Channel in Buffalo, and that was very bad and very scary. And so you kind of have to trust the coxswain to be going in the right direction, to know what they're talking about.
Right. And the thing, like, I remember a lot of times you talk about how the coxswain on the boat would just yell.
Oh yeah, lots of
like there's
Move,
sometimes.
heifers!
Yeah, that's the thing I was trying to get you to say.
he doesn't like to say that.
She had this coxswain that was very nefarious for saying that. And the reason I wanted to kind of highlight that is there are times where, and I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing, but like not being forceful, but making sure that like the direction is known, and that there's going to be times where I'm at the front of the boat, but my back is turned to wherever it is that we're going. And for me to keep the boat going forward, I have to trust that the direction that she's barking out at me sometimes. That there are some times where she's going to be forceful, and I have to, because I'm a sensitive person, I think you'll attest to that. Rick, as you've gotten to know me, I'm kind of a sensitive guy, despite all of this. And I need to be willing to, at times, put aside my sensitivity and that need to kind of be like, please make me feel good, and make sure that I'm trusting you with the direction.
I think it also has to do more with, like, you had touched on the idea that we have an evolving understanding of marriage. And of course, in a time when women weren't educated and couldn't have bank accounts and couldn't have jobs, yeah, it was super important that the husband have a much stronger role in the family, because I would have no social power. But now I think it has a lot more to do with constant communication, because one of the ways that I've heard that scripture explained is that it's not subordinate but submissive, and so therefore under the same mission. And the idea is that we're going in one direction. For us, that direction is we want a family that is safe for our children. We want to raise good humans who go out into the world and aren't jerks. We want to give them the skills that they need, and I think we have a very specific idea of like the kind of life that we want to live. We don't need the biggest house and the nicest car. We want to have a life focused more on living for others and being open to opportunities for service and stuff like that. And so for us to do that, it means we kind of have to constantly be in communication and reassessment, because it's really easy to get caught up in the culture around us of like, you gotta get the promotion, you gotta take this opportunity, you gotta get the house, you gotta get the car, you gotta go on the vacation. And it's important for us to keep a good barometer on like, what is our motivation for this? How does this decision fit in with our long-term mission? And obviously not everything is that. I mean, my sister has this great thing where apparently when I first had a kid, when I was a brand new mom with a baby, she was like, are you gonna send your kid to school with Lunchables? And I said, no, because I love my kids. Well, it turns out my son will only eat Lunchables for lunch. So
I pray to God some days that my kids are going to eat a whole Lunchable.
Not every decision is the hill to die on, but having that open communication and that trust and that ability to be vulnerable with each other, so that we can be in assessment with, okay, so how is this fitting with what we want to do? And as Catholics, that's really important, because we want to be constantly open to life, and that throws an extra level of challenge in with our long-term goals and the kind of family that we want to be raising. So
you talk about being submissive and the sense of being under and following the mission. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges in preparing couples for marriage, right? I'm really the bubble buster when it comes to people getting married, because I challenge young couples and older couples with the church's vision of marriage, because they think it's the bride's day and I'm going to have this whole thing, and I'm like, the marriage is not about you. And they're like, what do you mean? Everybody says it's about the bride, it's the bride's day. It's not. I mean, if you want to go home and do your wedding at home, that's fine. But if you come to church, you're saying that this is about God. That not one of you, but the two of you are coming together, and you're coming in front of all your family and your friends to thank God for the gift of love that He's placed in your hearts. And He is the object. And you two come together, and I say to people, you are publicly engaging on a mission journey. And I'll scare couples, I'll say to them, Kate, because I'll say, we all want to be happy, right, in life. We long for fulfillment. And eventually we find this one person who sweeps us off our feet, the one person who makes us feel complete. And I'll say, Kate, Adam's not going to do that for you. And they're like, what? And Kate's not going to do that for you. Because that hole in our hearts can only be filled by God, right? What you find in marriage is a partner on the journey, on the mission. And the reason you're standing before everybody else is because you're saying, we are so in love and we're so grateful because of God's love. We stand before you to say, we will witness to you how powerful God's love is. Yes, we will fight and we will make up and we will show you that God's power is bigger than any difference, which is meant to inspire the rest of us. And I can say this with confidence because as we had dinner last night and we're talking about this a little bit. And just so you know, having dinner with them and the kids, I realized they're both submissive to their children. It was a lot of fun. They're great parents, by the way. But living in community, I live with 9 other men, right? That takes a lot of dialogue and a lot of sharing and a lot of discernment. You can't always have what you want. Like, if you want to do something, you have to talk about it as a house. I want to replace the kitchen counter. Well, it's going to be a discussion, right? Because we have and we're not always, it's not always rainbows and flowers. Yeah. There's times when we have conflicts as friars, and we make up and we move on. And hopefully that is an example to the rest of the Christian community, that we're real people, like in marriage. Our life is very similar to marriage. So what you do and how you raise your kids has an impact not just for yourselves, but for everybody else. You have a mission, vocation in the world.
Yeah.
And the other thing too is so often we forget, I even forget sometimes, that sacraments, as far as what the church says about them, is they are a visible sign of God's invisible grace. And the whole point of my marriage relationship with Kate is to not only try and be an example of God's love and God's grace towards others, but also to be an example of God's love and grace to her and to our kids, because everything about the sacraments is supposed to reorient us back towards God. Yeah. And that's what they are at their base, is those visible signs of God's invisible grace. So there is something very holy and sacramental about marriage. It's not just good relationship. It's not just good parenting. It's not just being a good neighbor. There's also a very heavenly aspect to it. And I think that you kind of started to touch on that, but one of the questions we get a lot, obviously the big elephant in the room is talking about same-sex marriage. But also there's a lot of things that people ask questions about when they're getting ready for marriage. And I wanted to get your opinion on this, Rick, because you have probably prepared hundreds, if maybe not thousands of people for the sacrament of matrimony. And that is, why do people have to get married in a church building? So often people, when they're getting ready for marriage, they want to go to the beach or the mountain, or they want to do these things, which are all beautiful and good. But why does the church ask us to get married in a church building?
There's a lot of debate about that. People would love to be married elsewhere, right? And a lot of it now has become economical, right? Not economics. People are looking for a venue that's very expensive. They can get an all-in-one package at this venue. And the church is struggling with that. Basically, the sacraments are a moment of communion with God, of experiencing God's grace. And the church is the gathering place of the community. So I remember in the old days, we used to have bands, right? We'd say, Kate and Adam want to get married. Does anybody have any reason to say they shouldn't? Because it was a small community. People knew everybody and said, well, Adam's hooked up with this other woman, so maybe they shouldn't get married. Or I think Kate wasn't she a sister at one point? Like, she really, you know? So we knew each other, and there was a sense of community. And so not getting married in your church is like, well, and when people do that, it's like eloping, right? It's not inviting your family to the most sacred moment in your life. That being said, there are dioceses in the U.S., like I think the Archdiocese of Baltimore, which allows you now to have marriages in other places as well. As a parish priest, it would be hell. I've got to be quite honest with you. It would be absolutely hell, because weekends are a busy time as it is. There's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of things to juggle at the same time. If I have to get my butt up to some park or country club and set up and make sure the venue is appropriate, there's a certain, this is a sacrament. This is not just a contract. So that's the other thing we should talk about. That marriage, the sacrament of matrimony, is a covenant. So in the church, in society, there's an understanding that a contract is an agreement between two parties where I promise to do one thing and you promise to do the other thing back. So you will deliver to me some flowers and I will pay you money. A covenant is different. A covenant is I make my vow to you no matter what. If you break your vows, my vows still stand. So it's an image of Christ's covenant with the church. God will love us forever. That's what the rainbow is symbolic of, right? God will never take his love away from us, forever. No matter how much we stray, God will love us. There's a great prophet, the prophet Homer, and is it Homer? And his wife, oh, it's a horrible name. Is it Homer?
Are you thinking of
Hosea.
Gomer, his wife?
Gomer.
Yeah.
Hosea is the
Hosea.
Gomer.
I'm thinking Homer and Gomer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's Hosea and his wife Gomer. And Gomer is like, excuse the language, a total slut. I mean, she's sleeping around with
She's a woman of
everybody,
ill repute.
you know, and people are mocking Gomer, mocking Hosea and saying, you know, you're the like the ridicule of the town. No, I promise to her unconditional love. No matter what she does, I will always love her. Right? And that's what marriage is as well. And that's where we have the indissolubility of marriage. That once you've made your vows in the sacrament of marriage, you can't take that back. Because the very nature of marriage is, I'm not ever going to take it back. So how can you then take it back? Now, we should probably quickly go on to annulments.
Sure.
So there are situations where people have annulments. So people say, well, what's that, just like Catholic divorce or divorce light? What is an annulment? An annulment is basically when two people get married, there is the legal, civil, human reality of marriage. For the sacrament to happen, you have to give yourselves to one another, as Kate said, 100%. No holding back, no reservations. All of who I am, every bit of me, I give to you and you to me. Now, if there is something in the relationship at the time of marriage, and this is key, at the time of marriage, if I don't even know who I am, if there's a major issue I'm hiding from you, if there's something that I'm not telling you about me that is substantial, have I really given myself to you?
Right.
And so sometimes the church will look at it and say, well, this person was abused as a child, had traumatic events, their whole headspace is messed up. They didn't have the wherewithal to make a commitment to marriage. They were lost, whatever, or maybe they got pregnant and they felt pressure to marry. They weren't making a reasonable choice. And so, yes, they were married civilly. It's a legitimate marriage. The children are legitimate. Everything is kosher. But the sacrament didn't take place. And so we're not bound by that. But if the sacrament has taken place, it's for life.
And that's part and parcel with when we say those marriage vows within the nuptial blessing, within that part of a marriage, You're saying that you come to that point, you're there at the altar, you're there in the church, freely and without reservation. And we're talking about things that could prohibit you. So like obviously there's things that like, if somebody in that relationship going into the marriage is already being unfaithful, that would be a qualifier for something like an annulment. Or they're being dishonest about like, maybe there's like substance abuse issues that could lead towards like disharmony within the home. But there's also things too, like I don't work with married couples as much as you do, but Kate and I have done some marriage prep and pre-Cana stuff with couples, and a lot of times we have to remind people, like when you show up at your wedding, don't be loaded when you show up in the room, because that is actually a qualifier for annulment. If you were to go into your wedding and you're intoxicated, you're not making that decision freely. And you could be coming out of it and literally wake up the next day and be like, wow, did I really do that? Did I really?
I've had weddings, and I tell people at the rehearsal, do not go drinking the night before. Do not drink the day up. And I had one wedding come in. All the groomsmen and the groom were wearing dark glasses as they came in. I was like, oh crap, this is going to be a mess. And they were. I mean, the groom seemed sober, and I got to presume that he was, but it was a little tricky, But you see that a lot, people who don't understand that their disposition. I've been a priest 29 years. I've done marriages as a deacon, so 30 years of weddings. I had once the mother-in-law come in and say to me, don't let my son get married because he's cheating on his girlfriend, on his fiance. But you can't say anything. It was one of those things. I'm like, oh, now what do I do?
What do you do?
I can't say because
Okay,
it might reveal who it is. But
Gotcha.
it's one of those things where, you've got to be honest,
One of the stories that I like to tell people a lot is a friend of mine who's been doing ministry professionally for a long time shares this, and I always like to share it with other people, especially people who are in the process of discerning marriage, is she had a friend, a very good friend of hers, who met a guy, they fell in love, and it was clear that they were going to get married. They went through all the marriage prep stuff. The husband was never really raised in like a home with like a religious background or anything like that, but he went through all of the prep. And one of the things that you learn as a married couple, I remember when we went through our pre-Cana stuff, we were talking about, part of the commitment of marriage or matrimony as a sacrament in the church is the commitment to raise children be open to life, open to children, and raising those children in the faith of the church, being Catholic. And I remember she tells a story so vividly, like her fiance and her, the day of their wedding, saw each other, and he's like, I'm just letting you know I said all of these things, but I'm not interested in our kids being baptized, I'm not interested in raising them in the church. And she walked out. She walked out of the wedding during that time, and I can't imagine how anxiety-riddled she must have been and how wrecked she must have been. But that's one of those things to remember, and I don't try and focus on the negative with, like when I talk to teens or young adults or anybody who's in the process of getting ready to get married, but you have to constantly be discerning, that means prayerfully thinking about that sacrament up until the I do, up until that marriage is consummated and that marriage covenant is fulfilled. You have to constantly be, and one of the things that Kate said to me, I don't know if you remember this, if you want to share about it a little bit, but how we talked about, and you very specifically talked about, as we were engaged in going through preparations, like you were still praying about the idea of religious life to some extent, and I was still praying about and discerning, because before Kate and I met, I was actually accepted to seminary, and so we were both praying about and discerning about different paths in life, and you still have to be open to those possibilities, even up until that time where the matrimony actually occurs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
I think it was pretty early on in us dating that I was pretty sure that I was not called to religious life, but yeah, I guess
she looked into his eyes and realized it was game over. So I wonder if this is a good time to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, so we haven't had any questions online yet, but we have people joining us and watching, so thanks for being with us. But if you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask us There's no topic that's out of bounds. We're totally comfortable with answering any questions that you guys have. And those for those of you guys who are here, and obviously those of you who are online, we've been doing, like I said, Kate and I have done marriage prep before. Rick's obviously prepared tons of people for the Sacrament of Matrimony, but Rick also has background in counseling as well. So there is, obviously, as Rick has talked about, a very human aspect to this that should be considered when we're thinking about marriage, when we're discerning about marriage. And so if you guys have any questions for us that you'd like to ask, just go for it. You don't have to even raise your hand. If you just want to ask, go for it. We're more than willing.
I think we have one here.
Yeah. So I've read and heard that Indian Hinduism has married couples have a lower divorce rate than American Catholics. So I'm not sure if that's true. I don't know if the Catholic Church keeps those statistics, but if it were true, why? I have more American Catholics divorced than Indian Hindus.
I wouldn't know. I mean, I'm not familiar with those statistics, and how much of that is cultural. So the question Richard asked was, there's a statistic that Hindu Indians have a lower rate of divorce than American Catholics. Like I said, I don't know the details of that. What I do know is that the Center for Research in the Apostolate in Georgetown, CARA, has done research into marriages, and I think it was CARA at Georgetown. And what they found is that I think the divorce rate in the U.S. is what? 50%? Okay, so success rate of 50%. If you or one of the persons in the marriage attends church on a semi-regular basis, it goes up to something like 70% success rate. And if you both attend church on a regular basis, it goes up to like 90%. So I would say that things like community, family, and faith play a big role in the success of marriage. One of the challenges I see, and having traveled to Italy and visited our friars in Padua and seeing that lifestyle a little bit differently, we tend to move around a lot in the US and Canada, right? It's not unusual for us to be miles and miles away from our parents and our families. Whereas in more traditional societies, you're having trouble. You have your aunts, your uncles, your nieces, your nephews, your grandpas. There's a village that supports the marriage, that benefits from the marriage, but also supports the marriage. And I think that's something we lack. People feel very isolated in their marriages sometimes, and when there's a conflict, they have nowhere to turn except to social media and to other people.
I think that would be my guess. I mean, I'm not an expert in anything except for like our marriage, and I think Evan could argue I'm not even that great at that. But I think that there's this Kurt Vonnegut quote about how he thinks that the reason that marriage doesn't work is because we developed as humans in these huge communities. And he has this line about how in this one particular culture, when a baby is born, they take the baby and they introduce the baby to everybody, all aunts and uncles and cousins. And so then you have this American marriage, and it's like, oh, it's just the two of us. There should be all these other people. And even if you lived close to your family, the way that our culture encourages us to live is super isolated. The idea that in order to be successful means that we are invulnerable. Asking for help is the opposite of success. Like, that's a pretty strong idea in American culture, whether we say so or not. And so if you have that kind of idea that it's just us and this is all we've got, I mean, that can get pretty stressful. Yeah. So I would definitely say something like...
There was a time, both my sisters are great moms. Anne and Yolanda are amazing moms and both raised their kids really well. But I remember a situation, my younger sister Yolanda has two children. They're about 2 years apart. I was there visiting and they were both sick, right? And one of them started having a meltdown and is just crying inconsolably and shrieking, which of course stirs up the other one, and the other one starts crying and shrieking, and there's nothing you can do. To which, as a good celibate, I said, okay, well, good night. I'm gonna leave you. And they still remember that to this day, and I couldn't handle it. It was like, because they wouldn't shut up. I mean, they're just screaming, and it's like, how do you do this, right? which is a great gift. But I also know that my sisters had my mom, my dad, and their other family members who would support them in that. I'm not a parent, but I've seen it. It is hard. I babysat my nephews for 2 weeks, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Getting them to church was the hardest thing I ever did in my life.
That's accurate.
Right? Because
It's trying to
the
be-
kids didn't like going to church. So I said, I'm from Montreal. I was going to take them to St. Patrick's Cathedral, which is a beautiful church in Montreal. So you got to get them showered, which is a challenge. Make sure they pooped, they're dressed, they had breakfast, everything is done. It's so hard to get them out the door. And my nephew Christopher says, I got to go get my sunglasses. I say, go, run. So he goes upstairs and he's gone for 5 minutes. I go up and he's at the computer. I said, I thought you were getting your sunglasses. He says, I don't have sunglasses. I said, well, you lied to me. Am I losing my mind? He clearly said, I'm going to get my sunglasses. Anyways, get your ass in the van. We get to Montreal through the bridge. We just by the skin of our teeth, we make it into church. Church is hotter than heck. We're dying in the pews, and the priest comes out, and he looks like he'd rather be anywhere else but church. And you know what? How deflating that is? I feel like saying, buddy, do you know how hard I work to get these kids at Mass? And you look like you're bored? Come on. And so I swore that day I will never, ever complain about a family being late for Mass. Because I've experienced it's hard. So priests out there, if you're listening too, do not complain about your parishioners.
The other thing I managed to, while we were standing here, kind of do a little bit of research. And based on data from qforum.org, I think that's maybe where you may have seen some of that data, it says that out of all major faith groups interviewed within the United States, Catholics have one of the lowest of most Christian groups, which is a divorce rate of approximately 19%, but that Hindus have a divorce rate of less than 1%. It also notes, though, that a lot of that lower percentage rate has to do with the smaller population body that was surveyed, just trying to be able to actually find enough people who ascribe to the belief in Hinduism to create a relevant sample size in comparison to practicing Catholics, which is one of the largest religious affiliations in America. But Rick's quote about religious faith practices is exactly right. It actually shows data that regular attendance in a worship service amongst those who identify as Christian increases their probability of their marriage being intact from 50% to up to 69%. Regular prayer life increases it another, I think it was 10 to 12%. So it actually shows, the data shows, that can be backed up by Kara, who did some research as well, that regular participation in a faith practice is what actually seems to help bolster the success of a marriage. And then also things like the communal or the community aspect that people find when you move from less of like that kind of nomadic mentality to staying in more of a community aspect. I even remember when we were younger, we pitched the idea to another married couple that we know about living in community. So they're looking at buying a house, and we're looking at buying a house, and we're looking at like a 2 or 3 bedroom, and they're looking like a 2 or 3 bedroom, and I looked and I was like, wow, this house that's it was literally the focal point, between where they lived and we lived. If you were to draw 2 lines and be like, boink, where would you meet? There was this amazing house that was 6 bedrooms. And naturally, on our salary, we couldn't have afforded that, and they couldn't have, but together, and I was like, wouldn't it be rad if we just had this compound and live in community and be able to support one another? And they're like, you are absolutely insane. And we didn't do it. We didn't do it. But the thing I felt was really telling about that was, in my heart, the idea of the discussion was actually really interesting, and was really kind of oh wow, maybe and there was serious discussion, should we even be thinking, is this? And for me, it was so much my desire to lead my family and have my family live in community. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And that is so absolutely important. I think that to some extent, and again, this is me hypothesizing. Is that a word, hypothesizing?
Yeah.
Okay. I know if I conjugated that correctly. But the idea that specifically within Catholicism, that the local parish was such a focal point of community life, and we have kind of moved away from the idea somewhat, or abandoned that idea that the parish is that center focal point of community life. Not that it's not important, because we come here for worship, we come here for some community, but it's not the focal place in the neighborhood where we rally together, we come together. So that is also a part of it, that community aspect that maybe we don't have as much as we used to, and over time has affected how we look at and view marriage.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah.
We sort of took off on Richards and Debbie, no? Jack? How have children changed your marriage?
I don't know if I can answer that with just human language. It makes it more intense.
Okay.
I don't know, kids are hard. They're very hard, but they're also really funny. It made me really have to depend on Adam for a lot of things. When my son was born, it did not go well, and I was on bed rest for a good while afterwards. And so that expanded just how vulnerable I was with him and how much I needed him. I mean, I think when we go into marriage, or at least when I went into marriage, there's like that emotional need, you know, that level of romance that like, oh yes, but this was like literally like I couldn't make it to the bathroom without help. And so that was like a whole nother level of like intimacy. It also forces like you know, I keep saying communication, but like trying to keep those long-term goals of raising a good human in mind is really hard. You know, like yes, it would be a lot easier if we just let them watch Power Rangers right now, but we're trying to, you know, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean,
I don't know if that answers the question.
and just sharing from my own experience, I don't feel like I had bad parents. My parents were very hardworking people, and they were there, and they tried to come to as many events and parts of my life that they could. But I mean, obviously, there's things that they missed, and I don't hold any grudges or anything like that. But I say all of that because, for me, being a present father was super important to me. Not because my dad wasn't present physically, but a lot of times I yearned for a relationship with my dad, present emotionally. You know, and having kids of my own was just such a crazy experience because it was all very hypothetical, and it was all very much like this existential idea, like, oh yeah, we're having kids. Like, my wife is pregnant, we're gonna have a kid. There's a kid there, we're gonna have a kid. And then when our son was born, our first child, I was like, it wrecked me completely. And then when our daughter was born, it happened all over again. I get wrecked by my kids. And one of the things that I have to remember is, I know, and this isn't me trying to brag or self-aggrandize, I know that there's not much that I'm good at. Like, I'm good at a couple of things, but I know that I'm really good at being a dad. Like, I really want to be a dad. But for me, one of the most important things for me to remember within my marriage is that my primary vocation, my primary responsibility is being a husband. And I can't let my marriage suffer for the sake of my kids, because that is an oxymoronical statement. If I'm a bad husband because I'm paying too much attention to my kids, I'm not serving and loving my kids by not loving their mother. So I constantly have to remind, because like I can show the test, I get hyper-focused on the things that my kids want to do. And they're like, my daughter, she'll just, well, I'll just be sitting around doing whatever. And if I'm on the floor, and she'll just run over me, like, she yells, wrestle, fight! And she'll just launch herself at me like a torpedo. And then it's on, like we're wrestle fighting. I am so apt to just be like, yeah, whatever the kids want to do, I'm going to do that thing. But also remembering that I need to be present to my wife and making time for like date night and stuff like that. It's not easy, and other parents could probably attest, it's not easy to make time for date night. You know, to make sure that like I'm not supposed to stop dating my wife just because we got married. Like, I want her to feel loved. I want her to feel special. I want her to feel valued, and I want her to know her worth. And I have to make sure that I know that that's like an everyday choice. Love is a choice that you make every day. It's not a feeling or an emotion that I feel. And the other thing that really helped me too is early on in our marriage, Kate discovered this book. I had heard about it, but I never read into it. And she discovered this book about love languages.
Oh, yeah.
And learning what your love language is. And not only learning what your love language is, but what it isn't, because you have an opposite of it. And for me, going into my relationship with Kate, I had been in prior to Kate, she knows this, I was in a very long relationship with somebody in college, and that person desired gifts. I didn't pick up on, like, I didn't read that book, but I knew that she wanted things. And so the way that I let her know that she was loved by me is I bought her stuff. But then when I married Kate, that's not Kate's love language, and I will try to surprise her with gifts or think of these grand gestures of things to make her feel special and these things I can give her, and she's just like,
It's my love language.
I know.
Bring on the gift. I'm just concerned. We're at 8:00.
Right.
We probably should wrap it up.
Yeah.
But want to say thank you to Adam and Kate for sharing their life. If you guys have any questions, feel free either through Facebook or in person to ask us. And if you're watching this and I think I can't echo enough what Adam said about no matter what happens in your family, the most important relationship is between you and your spouse. That is sacred, and that is that's what your kids need, is a solid couple. And you're going to need it when your kids leave the house too. So invest in your own future.
Someday, right?
Right. But the other thing is, if there are some really good resources out there. Marriage Encounter is a wonderful movement throughout the world that helps you reflect on your experience of marriage. And another one where if you're having a little bit of a rocky situation, there's an organization called Retrouvailles. Retrouvailles, it's French for rediscovering, refinding yourself. Google it. I think I've heard great things about it in terms of marriage. The other thing is to talk to your parish priest, a sister, a deacon, a lay pastoral minister that you trust. They probably have some really good resources. You as a couple and as an individual are worth investing in one another. And if you're struggling, if you're just feeling uneasy, go and talk to somebody. Mm-hmm. It's totally worth it. We've heard it all before, no shocks, no surprises. And it's amazing what small little changes can make such a big impact in your life and make you happier. So thank you for listening.
If I could throw one more thing on top of there. If you're looking for a great resource for you as a married couple, even if you're not necessarily Catholic, but you're looking for a great resource about how to live that Christian virtue of marriage and exploring the sacrament of matrimony, I have a great resource that I'd like to recommend that some friends of ours actually wrote. It's a book called Holy Marriage, Happy Marriage by Chris and Linda Paget. You can totally find it on Amazon. You can search for it. I'll drop the link for the Amazon link in the comments for our Facebook Live video. Or if you're in Syracuse and you want to stop by the Franciscan Place, we've got multiple copies available for purchase there. And they have a great resource for marriage.
Where's the Franciscan Place?
That is in Destiny USA Mall here in Syracuse. If you ever want to come visit us and see the ministry that we're doing out of the Franciscan Place, we're on the bottom level of Destiny USA. Come by and stop by. We have a wealth of different Catholic items, books, religious items, rosaries, things of that nature. But we also have a chapel available for Mass, Eucharistic adoration, and daily reconciliation with our friar priests. So except for Sunday. Sundays were closed because
And you can go to confession and then go to DSW and buy yourself new shoes.
Super acceptable confession times. Some of the best confession times in the country, I think.
But with that, we thank you guys for joining us. We thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you again next month for Town Talks. Thank you so much for being here.